On Yom Kippur, this is Yom Kippur. On Rosh Hashanah, I talked about the minutes of our lives, especially those moments when time seems to stand still, when the mundane suddenly becomes remarkable and life-changing and burned into our memory. I have been moved these last 10 days by the stories many of you have told me and wrote to me about the mom or dad you are missing so much, about tragic losses and joyful experiences, about children growing up, about making the most of every moment. We bring, each time we walk in here, we bring so much history into this place. And we mark history here too. This January, just after the secular New Year, we said a reluctant goodbye and paid tribute in this place to Debbie Friedman, Jewish musician extraordinaire. At age 59, Debbie died too young, but not before, with her life and her music, she transformed the synagogue and worship and the things we sing forever. At her tribute, I shared some memories from the summer of '76 at Camp Swig, when I was a counselor and Debbie was our most remarkable song leader. Over these months since her death, I've remembered other scenes from camp where Debbie was the star. One night, we counselors had to teach our kids the history of early Zionism, to reenact the birth of the modern Israeli state in 75 minutes. My fellow counselors and I nominated Debbie to play the part of Theodore Herzl addressing the Zionist Congress. She put on a beard, she exhorted the gathering with gusto, and then in a brilliant finale, led us all in a heart-bursting, throat-searing, tear-jerking chorus of Herzl's famous motto, a la Debbie Friedman, Im tirtzu, ein zo agada. If you will it, it is no dream. But when we all had finished singing, Debbie kept right on jumping up and down, fake beard flapping, screaming at us, exhorting us, keep dreaming. Keep the dream of Israel alive. Am Yisrael Chai. Keep dreaming. Theodore Herzl could have used Debbie Friedman back in 1902, when every rational person told him he was delusional, not prophetic, to propose the rebirth of Israel. Face up to reality, they said. But Herzl just responded, Im tirtzu, if you will it, if you work for it, it is no dream, it will happen. His words sustained him and all who believed in Israel, even when challenging realities on the ground got in the way over and over again. Israel reborn 63 years ago was a dream come true. Some of you, I know you've told me that story too. Remember the exact moment you sat by a radio to hear the birth of the state of Israel, and you treasured that memory as sacred. But of course, within minutes of the declaration of statehood came more heavy, unrelenting doses of reality, especially the reality of a succession of wars and a continuing security threat from every side. And this past year has brought yet another wave of sobering realities to our dream of Israel at peace. Many of you have followed closely, as I have, the speculations about how the Arab Spring will affect Israel. Israel's diplomatic relations with Turkey and Egypt have deteriorated to the delight of Israel's foes. At the UN, the Palestinian bid for statehood increases the complexity of both the Israeli and the American positions moving forward. Tomorrow and next week, next month, we know the situations will change. They always do, minute to minute. But even in advance, we can predict a continued push and pull, diplomatic posturing, political theater, and Israel's existence at stake in the balance. In the weeks to come in this new year, we'll have many opportunities at Temple to hear top-flight analysts speak about current events unfolding in Israel. We've invited exceptional speakers, starting with Daniel Sokach of the New Israel Fund and Zach Bodner of AIPAC. Please be part of those conversations. Please bring your questions and diverse opinions to our open forums. Those dates will come upon us soon enough. But now is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is time out of time. Yom Kippur picks us up and carries us to the haunting notes of Kol Nidre, carries us back from the news, back into the realm of dreams and visions, to dreams once abandoned and new dreams now reclaimed, to vows once broken and now renewed. Yom Kippur, I think, is the time to talk about today's Herzls, the Israeli visionaries working with unflagging courage to make their 21st century ideas, their dreams, a reality. They, like Herzl, know well the grave dangers. But these prophets also see clearly that for Israelis and for all of us lovers of Israel around the world, the Zionist narrative has to include not only protecting the Jewish state, but also a focus on what kind of state a secure Israel wants to be, just as Herzl described in great detail what Israel would look like. Israelis today are asking their fellow citizens, what will we stand for in our country? How will we craft a just society fixed firmly in Jewish values? What are the moral dimensions of our policies? Tonight, I would like to introduce you to three of those new dreamers, starting with a balding hipster named Kobe Oz. Kobe grew up in the south of Israel in Sderot, a small town well known, sadly, because it is the target of the thousands of missiles launched from Gaza. 10 years ago, Sderot had 46 public bomb shelters. Today, 5,000. Since the 1950s, Sderot has absorbed Jewish immigrants from North African countries, including, they wish North African countries, including a cantor from Tunisia named Nissim Masika. For a city under siege, perhaps defiantly, Sderot has produced a disproportionate number of musicians, including Masika's grandson, Kobe Oz, now one of Israel's most popular rock stars. Oz and others like him have become the voice of a new movement in Israel who understand their reality all too well, but have pledged not to let the dream give way to circumstance and reality. Having served in the army, Kobe and his friends believe that their state is both militarily secure enough to handle its hostile neighbors and strong enough to wrestle with questions of national purpose, religious pluralism, economic and social justice. Kobe Oz says, and I quote him, we cannot wait for security issues to be resolved once and for all. That day may never come. We must build the country we dreamed of, defend the country we dreamed of, so that, God willing, when we have peace with our neighbors, we will live as we always dreamed, in a place that truly can be called a light to the nations. It all started this summer, can you believe it, with cottage cheese. Cottage cheese is the Israeli breakfast staple. But when government subsidies declined, the middle and lower classes couldn't afford it. Grassroots grumbling about cheese morphed into baby stroller marches over the cost of daycare, and then into tent city protests about the shortage of affordable housing. Israel's Tentifada has involved at least 500,000 people, a percentage equivalent to what it would look like if 20 million Americans had camped out on Wall Street this week. And we may yet see that. So just imagine it in that small country. The tent dwellers were decrying the growing disparity between a new, very wealthy class and the majority of Israelis who are struggling and often failing just to make ends meet. Unlike the violent riots in neighboring countries, Israelis protested peacefully in a democratic forum of multiple voices and opinions. If you heard too little about the summer protests in Israel, it's probably because, thankfully, they lacked the vitriol and violence that grabs headlines. An Ethiopian Israeli who visited one of the tent cities said, "Of all the latest upheavals in our region, I definitely prefer this one, which is all about togetherness, reaching out to one another with compassion. This is the Israel I dreamed about as a little girl in Ethiopia." One Israeli analyst described this summer's phenomenon to a group of us rabbis right before Rosh Hashanah. In his interviews at the tent cities, he said he spoke with a diverse cross-section of Israeli activists, young and old, secular, religious, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, immigrants, and Sabras alike. And he choked up as he spoke to us with great emotion and pride when he said, "I felt I was in the midst of a national cheshbon hanefesh, a national accounting of our country's soul as we looked ahead to the holy days. Thank God," he said, "we are breaking down tribal and ethnic and religious barriers to get to the heart, to get to the soul, to get to the essence of what it means to build and live in a Jewish state, to live by Jewish values." So what are the tent dwellers and their supporters? One poll said 87% of the Israeli public supported them. What do they want? They dream of a tightly woven social safety net for the very poor. They dream of good schools with smaller classes for their children. They dream that a smaller cut of the national pie go to the West Bank settlers and to the ultra-Orthodox, who contribute very little to the economy, who avoid military service, and who wield a disproportionate power in the government. One tent dweller painted on his canvas home his own version of the famous words from the Torah, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. Instead, he wrote on his tent, Tzedek, Tzedek, Nirdof, justice, justice we all need to pursue. So meet Daphna Leak, a young Israeli in her 20s who started the protest movement on Facebook, of course, at a Tel Aviv rally on September 3rd that drew some 400,000 people. Daphna proclaimed, "We've created a new discourse here. We've replaced the word pity with the word compassion. We've replaced the word charity with the word tzedek, justice. We've replaced the word consumer with the word citizen. We've replaced the verb to wait with the verb to change. We've replaced the word alone with the word together. We are striding forward," she said, "to a better future, to a more just country." Watch Daphna on YouTube or become her friend on Facebook, and I bet you, like me, will want to pursue justice with her. Justice of the kind we have to practice now, this very week, in the wake of the arson attack by settlers on a mosque in the Israeli Arab village of Tuba, Zangaria. In tandem with Jews everywhere, the worldwide reform movement has already responded by establishing a fund to rebuild this torched mosque, to which we all can contribute, to replace the books, to repaint the walls, to rebuild. Israeli President Shimon Peres, visiting the scene of the crime with Jewish and Christian and Muslim leaders, decried that attack as contrary to the moral values and spirit of this country. And finally, meet Israeli journalist Uri Tuval, who wrote of the spirit Peres invoked in his article in Haaretz when he said, "The supreme value we seek is the value of life, a life of joy, creativity, partnership, and hope, a life that is based on what we have learned from the good and bad of the past to build a better future. If we shape our own destiny out of collective purpose and a confident belief of our place in the world, I believe," says Uri, "I believe we will undermine our enemies' resolve and strengthen our own." Daphna Leak, Uri Tuval, and Kobe Oz, together with hundreds of thousands of their fellow citizens, are imagining and planning and working toward the dream of Israel for the 21st century. All of them proudly put on the uniform of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, when called upon to defend their country. Though refusing to see themselves as victims, they are not at all oblivious to the real threats at their doorstep. In August, when 8 Israelis were killed in a terrorist attack near Eilat, the demonstrations, all the tent cities, went silent in a country sitting Shiva together. None of them denies the harsh realities, but God bless them. They continue to pursue the dream. Im tirtzu, ein zo agada. If you will it, it is no dream, is far more than a worn-out motto for the Israelis I know and the ones you have just met. As David Ben-Gurion famously declared, to be a realist in Israel, you have to believe in miracles. Daily miracles in Israel are the result of the strong will and the relentless faith of Israelis. But sustaining the dream also takes partners. That is us. We are the partners needed to engage with the modern state, with the modern dream, in all its bitter and sweet, in all its big dreams and harsh realities. Friends, let us vow on this Kol Nidre, this night of vows. Let us vow to strengthen our partnership with Israel despite the distance, despite the differences, and even, I know, though it breaks my heart, for some of you, despite the indifference that I hope you will let go of as we enter this new year. Israel's story is still being written, and we need to be part of that story. On this Kol Nidre, let me urge you as you consider all the magnificent places to travel in the world, visit Israel, because we are truly part of each other's story. Yes, let us always affirm we are part of one another's dream. And if you go, tell me, so I can help you meet the people that you've just met and their friends, the dreamers and the heroes and the prophets of our time. On this Kol Nidre, let us dream big and audaciously. Let us dream together how we will add our strength to those working for pluralism, for justice, and for security and peace in our beloved Israel. Let us dream big tonight. Let us dream big. And then let us get down to work. For we are one family, Im tirtzu, if we so will it. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will.